Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Welcome back to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. We are already well into the holiday season, and we know that while the holidays can and do bring a lot of joy, they can also bring immense stress and bring up feelings of grief and loneliness. Holidays can be a challenge for anyone, but we know our military and veteran families can experience unique stressors during this season. We also know that our military and veteran populations are more at risk for suicide, making this a higher risk time for our population in general. So, whether you're worried about navigating some of these holiday triggers yourself or want to prepare to support a loved one in your life, I'm very excited to be joined by Jasmine Lott on today's episode to talk about suicide prevention, navigating holiday stress, and getting the support you need. Jasmine, you have so many valuable personal and professional experiences and insights that inform this topic. So, I'd love to turn it over to you to tell our listeners just a little bit more about who you are and why you're here to talk to us about this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Um, wow, suicide prevention, veterans, all of the things that kind of define me as an individual. I am from the Austin, Texas area, born and raised, and I was in the United States Air Force. And from there, I went on to get my degree in nursing. And so I've been a nurse for a little over 11 years. And I actually work and I teach nursing students about mental health. And so for me, as a veteran, as a healthcare professional, I know all too well what it's like during this holiday season to just feel lonely and feel like there is no outlet to have to support or just the understanding and to layer that with being a veteran. I think that sometimes that space, you don't know where to go in that space, or it may not be as easily as accessible. And so for me, I enjoy being able to talk about the different spaces and the different things that you can do during this time from both a veteran and a healthcare professional. And so, yeah, I have two wonderful children. I have a husband, and I'm actually working on my doctorate to become a psych nurse practitioner. So my whole entire orbit is like mental health and just talking about it. But that layer of being a veteran for me is very important because oftentimes I think that we don't realize, not only as the veteran, but also as the spouse, what that looks like and how to navigate that space. Being in the military, you are taught one way of kind of thinking and living, and then you have your counterpart and your partner who may not always get that same insight.
Yeah.
And so just having that space and having that support, or even understanding how to support your loved one that may be struggling, especially during the holidays, we just know that this brings up so many emotions. A lot of times, this is where we think about the ones we've lost,
Mhm.
or the ones who may be sick. And so all of those emotions come from a place, and we don't always know how to support our loved ones. And so I hope that I'm able to share a little bit of what's helped me over the years. And one of the things that I've learned is having a support system, but also having someone that you can trust with those most vulnerable times of your life.
Yeah. I mean, yes, exactly what we're here to talk about. And I know you're going to have so much amazing insight to give folks. And we hope that like people outside of this community are listening too, because all of this stuff, while we're going to be talking about some specifics to our community, it's the holidays especially are a trigger, like you're saying, those feelings of thinking about someone we've lost or just feeling more alone. That happens to anybody. Um, but so one thing from the perspective, especially of thinking about family members who might be worried about their loved ones, is at least in the veteran community, is a lot of times we're not hearing from them, right? We don't know when they're struggling. They're not telling us that they're having a hard time or asking for help, and looking for that support. So I'm curious to hear from you for this community specifically. What do you think is kind of contributing to that, like kind of not not leaning on the ones that you love, not saying when you might be going through a hard time?
Yeah, I always like that question. I think it's loaded, and not
Yeah.
to discredit the armed services. I always tell people I've been through basic training in nursing school, and I would go through basic training again before nursing school. And everybody's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Listen, nursing school was hard." Rightfully so, but basic training was hard too. And going through, there's a breakdown that happens when you go through the military, but then there's that buildup, and then you get to your first, duty station, or you get to where you're going to be living, and then there's this sense of normalcy, right? And with that comes the woes of life. And as much as I love the military, I also think that there's a culture around if you're not fit for duty, that makes it very hard for you to do your job. And having any type of struggle, especially if it's mental, we already know in the society that we live in, mental health is not something that we talk about openly. Take out just being in the military, just as
Right.
a civilian. This isn't something that we um, see that's talked about in a space that's always safe. A lot of times there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of stigma behind what mental health is and what that looks like for certain people. And with that, the culture of if you're not fit for duty, then you can't have your service weapon or you can't perform your job. And so it's so layered when you talk about the veteran or even just the military, the active duty community. Veterans specifically, we go through this intense training. And I don't even want to say where we hide, but we definitely don't share. Like there's a culture around not sharing everything that you may be experiencing. So when you get out and you're needing to go to get those services, you just don't know how because it wasn't something that was instilled and it wasn't something that was talked about. And I think a lot of times as veterans, it is the lack of not knowing how to communicate and put words to what is actually happening, but then also not always knowing about the resources. I know for me as a veteran, I learn about new stuff every day.
Yeah.
I, I go to conferences and I see, the veterans there, and I always make it a point to go. And if I see like a veterans anything, I go and just say, okay, what do you do in this, atmosphere? Because there's so many resources. And for me, I like to try to bridge that gap because I have a lot of friends, I have a lot of family, I have a lot of people close to me that are veterans or knows veterans or that are in this community of active duty or just armed services. And that's the one thing that they always say is that they just never felt like while I was in, I didn't talk about it. So now that I'm actually able to see like a civilian provider and they're putting language and they're putting terms, it's like, oh wait, this is something that I've actually been experiencing while I was still active duty or while I was still in the service. And now I can actually identify and have a name to it. And I think and I hope that more people are comfortable, but I also hope that the military creates an environment that people are, because the data shows that our veterans and our active duty military are struggling every day with suicide. And it's not something that's going to go away. I always tell people working in healthcare, the pandemic, COVID-19 was horrible, right? I seen so many people. I would come to work and this patient was talking to me, and then I come back at the next start of my shift and they're on like a ventilator. And so it was happening so rapidly. But one of the things that I appreciate about COVID is that it created this space for us to be able to talk about mental health in
Mm,
a safe space
yeah.
in all aspects, not just it, I mean, no color, no gender, no ethnicity, no active duty veteran. Everyone experienced this pandemic and was able to say, you know what, I'm sad, or I'm whatever the emotion may be tied to it. And so what we've seen is a turn of this culture of saying, you know what, it's okay not to be okay. And so my hope is that that continues and that allows these veterans and these individuals and the spouses to say, yeah, my spouse isn't okay, or hey, my friend isn't okay. How do we help them? How do we get them to service instead of, that stigma that's like, oh, you're not okay now, you're not fit for duty. Maybe not right now, but I can be if I get the resources that I need.
Yeah. No, you're so right. I mean, it's so unfortunate that it took like a shared global trauma for us to get there, but it is one of those silver linings. Is yeah, we were all facing this really challenging experience, so we had to talk about it. You're right. I hadn't thought about how that has really trickled down and kind of changed the shape of kind of less stigma and more open conversation around mental health, but it definitely has. Uh,
Yes.
the other thing you talked about that I wanted to share a stat that I recently heard at a conference, the VSO, Veteran Service Organization, like you're saying, so many. I think for a while, like there was an old stat that was saying, oh, it's something like 40,000. I heard an updated stat, and there are like 77,000 VSOs in the United States. So
Wow.
yeah, how are we supposed to same as you. I like live and breathe, live, work, personal life in this community and exactly like you said, probably every day connect with some organization I was completely unaware of. So it's incredibly overwhelming to navigate.
Yes.
So yeah, how are we expecting people who are struggling to navigate it if we as professionals in the space also don't even know what's out there? So it's a lot. Um, So, thinking about like again, I know any time can be a stressor, but since we're upon the holiday season is upon us, right? And this is going to launch in the middle of that season. Thinking about the holidays in general, or beyond for this community specifically, you can be struggling and then you can get to that point where you really are having those thoughts of suicide. So, what do you see as some of those kind of tipping points and things to look out for that are kind of like, this isn't just like December blues, or anything like this. This is a real serious challenge. And what do you think are some of those things that are contributing to kind of like putting it over that line from just being maybe a little sad to, hey, this is something I really need to pay attention to, whether I'm the person experiencing it or the loved one seeing it.
Yeah, I always like to ask the question, because we all get sad. It's all, I mean, that's a natural emotion. Something happens and we find ourselves being sad. But I don't think people realize that if you're in that state of sadness, loss of pleasure, or interest in things, or withdrawing socially for longer than 2 weeks, that is definable as major depression. Now, I think that a lot of times people think 2 weeks, well, that's not long at all. I've been feeling like this for months. That's when you definitely need to like phone a friend. And if you have someone who has went through something or is going through something, or even with a loss, and I think too, we have to be able to identify that grief and loss isn't just the loss of someone. I think
Right.
that there's so many different types of losses that we sometimes often don't contribute to why someone may be sad. Obviously, losing a person and losing a significant other or someone very fundamental into your life is going to cause you some distress and going to cause you to be sad. But even the loss of a relationship or a job. Right now, we know that financial struggles is very real, and even without all of the things happening in our political climate, the holidays causes stress, right? Like everybody wants a gift. Like it's,
Mhm.
you have to go out and spend money sometimes that you may not actually have. And so all of that can be a contributing factor. But I think the biggest thing to note is that if you're feeling sad, loss of interest, loss of pleasure, wanting to withdraw socially, beyond, 2 weeks, that's definitely a time for you to phone a friend. That's definitely time where a friend should intervene. And that's where that tipping point kind of changes from, okay, is this just I'm sad about, my recent loss, or I'm sad about a loss, or it has me thinking about, for me, my grandmother, around this time, she passed in 2023. And around the holidays, she would do a lot of the cooking, especially around Christmas. And so, just having to navigate that space without her in that orbit, it makes me sad. And so, being sad is, like I said, a natural emotion, but when it lasts longer than 2 weeks, that's definitely the time. And I think that as the person who is the loved one seeing someone struggle, it's okay to have that conversation. And I think sometimes we get scared, and it is a complete myth that if you bring up suicide to someone, that then it comes into their head. No, if someone is contemplating and thinking of suicide, that thought has already been there, and you discussing it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to now have that thought in their head. And so I would hope that if someone is seeing a friend in a struggle, or their personality has changed a bit, that they feel comfortable having that conversation. And sometimes it's just as simple as, how can I help you right now?
Mhm.
And you don't have to have all of the answers. I think sometimes we have this preconceived notion of, like, we have to know how to fix everything. We don't. We should know resources, right? And there are awesome resources, like the Veteran Spouses Network, and NAMI, and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. But we don't have to have an answer. Sometimes silence is an answer.
No, I love that because I think I've even, felt or fallen victim to that of like having to help someone be like, I need to have everything. Like I need to have the whole plan and I feel scared about getting the whole plan. But I think that's a really critical reminder, is right? Just like holding that space for someone, the power in that alone could be all they need. Um, I'm gonna because you went right into that, so I'm gonna kind of jump to that. Let's stay with like the supporting person first. Are there things, whether in your own life experience or just things you've seen or know, um, are there really good things beyond, just holding the space and having some information to give that people can do? Are there also things to like stay away from, like, that could be bad? I hate to say it like that, but like, we know people come at this and with good intentions, and sometimes those good intentions can to turn to judgment or, things like that very quickly.
Yes. Cliches, man.
Hmm.
I have experienced a lot of loss in these last 5 years. Like my dad in 2020, my uncle, which was his brother, in 2021, and then my grandmother in 2023. And so I'm an only child and only grandchild. So
Yeah.
there is just me. And when I lost my dad, I really didn't even know how to navigate what I needed. It was very interesting because people wanted to support me. And I wanted them to, but they would ask me, what do I need? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know what I don't know, because I had never experienced a loss like that. Um, and so for me, it was just like, hey, I don't know. I just need space to kind of process. I think people want to fix it, right? They want to make it better, especially if they love and care about you. Like, as a supporter, and I've been guilty of this too, of, like, I want to make it better and I want you to be back in that space. But the reality is, once you've lost a relationship, a person, you never go back to being that same person. You are a new being, because now you are having to navigate a space without that person, or without that relationship, or without, and that's different. And so I think that it's fair for that supportive person to understand that that person's going to be different, and you need to give them space, but also be there as they need you there. The other thing is that nobody wants to hear everything's going to be okay. It
Mm.
will be. And in the conscious, like, looking forward, yes, everything will be okay. But nobody wants to hear that in that
Yeah.
time or space. And so I think when people say that, it is genuinely meant to be as a, like, everything's going to be fine, but I don't want to hear that. Or, the one that I really like. I can't stand hearing, and I make a joke about it and most people laugh, but oh, they're in a better place. Do we know that though? Like, how do we know? They might have been not in a better place.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if we're thinking of like heaven and hell, like maybe
Yeah.
they were bad actors on earth. Like maybe they're not in a better place. And so I always am like, kind of just stay away from that because people don't want to hear that. I think when you don't know what you don't know, or you don't know how to navigate that space, say nothing.
Mhm.
Just say
Yeah.
nothing. I'm
Yes.
here. I'm here for you in whatever way you need me to be. And then just leave that there and let that person who's going through that kind of figure out where they want to place you at. And I wish I would have been able to articulate that when I lost my dad. But losing my dad and going through a lot of like grief work, I realized that, and that's the other thing, too, as the support person, allow that person, so stay away from cliches, allow that person to bring you into whatever space they need you. But then also remember that grief looks different on
Mhm.
everyone and allow them to honor their grief in whatever way is beneficial for them. I think that America has a grief avoidance culture and we don't really know how to process grief and loss. And so because of that, we just brush through it and
Yeah.
we expect everyone to brush through it or everyone should do one thing or the other. One of the things I learned is I don't like grave sites. That's not, I don't feel a connection when I go. And it took me a while because everyone's like, you didn't go to the gravesite. You're not going to the gravesite. And I'm like, I don't want to. And so I found different ways to honor my losses. And it doesn't involve going to the gravesite. And I had to come to terms with that because a lot of people made me feel like this is what you need to do on Father's Day and on the birthdays. And then I'm like, that's not what I
Not
want to
gonna
do.
do it for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to hear because especially when it's a like a quote unquote comparable loss, right? Like, oh, well, I lost my dad, and this worked for me, so it should work for you. Or, and then I think another thing is to bring it back to what you're saying is loss is not just loss of a person, right? So, oh, I lost my job and they're going through a job loss, and you just got to get back out there like I did, and then you'll feel better, right? So I think those are the two things that I'm hearing from you that I think are so important to remember is everybody has their own grief journey and their grief needs, and grief can touch a lot of different spaces of life.
Yes.
And be brought up around this time significantly because that's when you're feeling you're supposed to have all the good feelings. So all the not so good feelings come up a lot quicker than you think they do at these times.
Yes.
So flipping that, you talked some about it, but flipping that to the person who may be like, you know what, I'm triggered right now. Like something's going on that's whether it's a new loss or something is getting remembered, brought up. I need help. Maybe they're in your shoes where a lot of people are, which is I don't know what that looks like. That's also a hard conversation to have and to like put yourself out there and ask. So any advice or thoughts on that side? The I think I need to talk to someone, but maybe I don't know more than that.
Yeah, I think knowing that talking is strength and getting out of your own head of like this is a weakness or this is knowing one again goes back to you don't need to know everything, but you do need to know that you have a safe space. And I like to hope that everyone has someone that they can call that's non-judgmental, that will be there and be able to support them and navigate. And when because this time brings up so many different emotions for a lot of different reasons, and you will see an influx of different, media outlets and different places being able to give the support that a person may need, which I'm always grateful for because then you can like, hey, you can go here, you can go here, you can go here. But even outside of this time of the holidays, those resources are still there. Most of these resources are there year round. It just gets more heightened because we realize that this is the time of year where people really struggle. And so if you have no one, then knowing 988, knowing those crises, knowing where those local 988 is simple. If you're in a crisis, you can always dial that number and someone on the other end can help you. And so I think understanding that because sometimes I hear people tell me I don't have anyone. And that makes me sad because I feel like everyone needs at least one person that they can call on and be like, oh my gosh, today's a rough day. Life is life and I need just a familiar voice to tell me that everything's going to be okay. But that's not always the case. And I don't want to be naive and saying, just call a friend. Like, no, that's not always the case. So if you can't call a friend, then there is a lot of, and I say a lot, but there are local and national hotlines that can be a friend in that time.
Yeah. And then that friend also happens to be an expert, which is great. So they can they know all the good resources to connect you to if that's what you're looking for.
Exactly, exactly.
No, that's yeah, it's I'm so happy that things like that exist. Because you're right. Yeah, not everyone has that person, or they may have people they care about, but they might not be the safe space or the safe space in that moment for this particular conversation. You never know.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, we're talking about kind of identifying the people in your life, resources that you can turn to, which makes me think of like prevention, right? Like how can we never know, right? Any of these losses that we're talking about, we can't control for that stuff. Like that could be any of us at any time going through something um unexpected. So what's some advice? What are some things like folks could do, whether it's the person who might be like, in case, something happens to me, or if like that this is going to be a hard time for you, or that anything, that you struggle with, mental health challenges or anything like that, what can an individual do to kind of get ahead of it, as much as possible, right? Stuff, life, as you said. So that piece, but then also are there ways to involve your loved ones in that prevention?
Yes, I think for me, it's always been talking and communicating. Once I got, so there is work that has to be done with the shame that comes with saying, you know what, I'm struggling mentally and it's beyond just like I'm a little sad. It's like I am very sad. Maybe I need a little medicine. Maybe I need a little therapy. Um, and even for me with my non-fatal suicide attempt, I was so shamed about even talking about it. I went through it. I did the work, but I didn't talk about it. I didn't, that was something that just was, there was stigma associated with it. And it took many years and it actually has become therapeutic to talk about it and not in a way of like, oh, it's like, this is where I was at. And in an effort to not go back to that dark, I like to say that dark place in my life, I have some kind of warning signs of when I'm starting to feel in that like space. And that's when I call on my friends. That's when I call on my husband. That's when I do some of the coping skills that I've learned. And for me, it's journaling. I love to do Pilates, talking to people. I love painting. And so finding those things that are healthy outlets is going to be the most important. The other part of it is knowing that if you don't have that space, there are different resources. And I think as preventative, learning about those resources. So when I first started being very active in talking about just suicide and suicide prevention, I didn't realize how many like resources were available. And I kind of was like, oh my gosh, we need this, and this. And I was on this like crusade to do like reinvent this wheel. And as I started to plug myself into the local community and just the state level and even the national level, I'm like, wait, we have resources. The VA has resources. There are grassroots organizations, there are nonprofit organizations that actually want to help the veteran community and the active duty as well as the civilian community. And so I'm like, well, how do I partner with them so that I can start telling people so that they can be in a space of prevention instead of on the other side? And so I think as part of the work of one, figuring out what it is that you like to do. What is it something that you enjoy? What is a calming space for you? That's one way to prevent. And I always like to take a couple of minutes and breathe, and then sometimes reach out to those resources, be it a friend, be it, there's so many free literature out there that can just help you kind of learn the things that will help calm your mind and calm your space. And then realizing those triggers. For a while, I had to write down, you know, there are certain times of the year where I just get sad.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, what contributes to the sadness? What happens? Okay, did the season change? Did something in work change? Like what happened that now that I'm sad versus not being sad? And being able to identify some of that, that in itself is prevention work, right? Because when you can say, you know what, around this time, that then allows you to tell the people in your space, hey, you know what? In October for me, when October hits, that's a rough month. It's just rough. Check on me. Call me every once in a while. Make sure I'm still doing okay. Maybe take me out to lunch or something, because I tend to want to isolate myself during that time. And I'm grateful for being able to realize that. And it's taken time and it's taken some years of just saying and being able to identify. But I think prevention starts with one, being okay, saying that you're not okay. That's the first step. And then really identifying at what space do I not become okay? What could be contributing to this? Obviously, when there's a loss, that's pretty identifiable.
Mhm.
But beyond that, what else is contributing? And then sharing that with someone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's huge. And it's also as a family member being able to also perhaps notice some of those patterns. I could speak from my own personal experience that like first 3 years of my husband and I's relationship, every November he was like unwell. And like I was just like, what's going on? And the first couple he couldn't really, I knew it was something, but couldn't talk to me about it. Turns out it was a battle anniversary of the loss of some folks and his injury and things like that. And so, like, then for me to know that was so helpful because as we approached, each November, then we could have a conversation. Hey, this is typically a tough time for you. Like, is there anything I can do to help? Or, like, do you have, your tools, like when you start feeling this way? But you'll laugh, Jasmine, hilariously, when we actually got engaged, didn't think twice about it. And our wedding scheduled for about that time in November. And I didn't like notice it until like a month before. And I was like, I went to him and I said, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't think about this. Is this going to be a problem? Like, are you going to be like unhappy? Are you going to be really having a hard time? And we're also trying to like get married and start our life together. And it was interesting. He said, you know what? No, he said, I actually did think about it. He said, I didn't talk to you about it, but I did think about it. And I'm looking forward to having a happy memory associated with this time of year. And he really hasn't had any major struggles around, related to this since then. So I was glad that he was thinking. I was not. But it's like, so as spouses or family members or whatever, like being able to see those patterns, talk about them, and then like have those prevention conversations when you know it is can be really huge as long as you don't forget.
Yeah.
Don't
And
forget.
it's funny that you say that because actually our wedding day is very similar to that. I told you my husband lost his mom. I don't know if I mentioned it, but my husband lost his mom when 2 days after his 18th birthday. And her birthday's in August. And so when he proposed, I was like, I just need a year from the date that you proposed. I'm indifferent about the day. And he actually, our anniversary is on his mom's birthday. And
Mm,
that was one of the things he said. I wanted to be able to have something positive and jolly to look forward to because during that time he's, typically very sad. And so just like your husband, it's like, okay, you know what? Yes, this is a hard time, but it also is a joyful time.
yeah. And a good reminder that like you can hold space for both things. It doesn't always have to be this huge, dark, heavy space just because, something truly horrible happened around that time of year. It doesn't have to be the rest of your life.
Yes.
You talked a little bit about like once you kind of like got this as your thing that you're going to be an advocate for. And I know you do a lot of advocacy work, both from kind of just like the suicide prevention in general, but also for healthcare workers. So I'd love to hear just to have some space for you to talk about your advocacy work, and also maybe like if other people are perhaps already interested in that or getting emboldened by our conversation and want to get more involved in this type of work, how they can do that.
Yeah. Oh man, I love advocacy. It's a slow burn though. I've had to realize how to like, okay, not burn myself. I think everyone's like this. In the age of technology, we like instant gratification. Like we like to see things turn around pretty much at a click of a button. But advocacy work is not like that in by no means. However, it's very fulfilling because you can see the progress of how things work. Where do I start? I do a lot of work in suicide prevention, like you mentioned. That is probably the most tender to my heart. Mental health in general, I like to take up space. But one of the things that I've learned in this advocacy work and just working in the mental health space, there are so many avenues. And one of the things that I've had to learn over time so that I don't burn out and I can kind of keep my enthusiasm about it is really finding a little corner. And not that the other things are not important or that I don't care about them or that I'm not working towards them, but really taking up a space in a corner that I can just kind of like fully engulf in. And suicide prevention has kind of been that corner, mostly because I have such a personal connection to it, but also on both ends of the veteran side and the healthcare side, we see at an alarming rates healthcare professionals losing their lives by suicide. And one of the sayings is if we don't have healthcare workers, we don't have healthcare. And
Mhm.
that's a very bold statement. And also on the other side of that is, our veterans who have served our country, are not equipped with how to deal with the immense amount of emotions once they've been relieved of their active duty. And so for me, this work is so much bigger than myself. I may not see all of the overturn in my lifetime, but I at least start to see the needle be moved when we talk about veterans and healthcare. I think that there is this stigma of what mental health looks like. But I'm here to tell you, it looks like me and it looks like you and it looks like the everyday person who has a family and a job and they're able to, perform their activities of daily living. And so I want to take that away from that. And that's why I do so much advocacy work. Some of the work I do is with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. They're largely in part all about suicide prevention. There is obviously a local sector here in Texas, and then there's the national. I've had the privilege of actually going to Washington, D.C., and talking to the congressmen and women in Texas, as well as both senators, about two very powerful bills for the veterans and safe gun storage
Mhm.
and that safety. And then for healthcare workers, it was a reauthorization act. A doctor in the New York area died by suicide after the pandemic and having to return to work probably a bit earlier than needed. And so it was incredible to be able to be in that space and talk about and share. And so when I do a lot of the advocacy work, it's a lot of me sharing my journey and my story and how I'm here now in this space of recovery. When I'm not working with American Foundation, I also do the walk out of darkness walk. I'm hoping to do it's an overnight walk, and um, I also work with NAMI Central Texas and NAMI Texas. I actually sit on the board for NAMI Texas, and NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And they're all encompassing. It's peer led. It's a nonprofit organization that will provide family support, peer support um, for the BIPOC community, and so it's well encompassed with a lot of different work at the local and the state level. They also have the national level as well. One of the things I want people to understand about advocacy, because I do a lot of just on boots on the ground kind of work, advocacy looks like writing a letter to your congressman, being a part of just the conversations about mental health and suicide prevention. And so it's not always you physically going out and doing something. I have been fortunate. I enjoy taking up that space, but advocacy is really starting that conversation to move that needle forward towards change.
And you mentioned your story as a piece of that, which, like, obviously we're all about. I mean, here, this is what the podcast is all about, is highlighting folk stories. But even in our peer support groups, we have literally our first session in our 6 week group is called Sharing Your Story, right? And talking, we link that back and talk to the power of your story as a tool for advocacy. So I wanted any more thoughts on that, just because, sometimes, especially in our groups and stuff, people will be sharing their story possibly for the first time because they've had so many negative experiences of trying to, like, open up to people and the reaction. So I just wanted to say if there was anything else you want to say about the power of sharing your story, whether it just be for you and healing or for a tool as advocacy.
Oh, yeah, it's been cathartic. I think that there is power in our story. And one of the things that I've learned over time is that no one can change what I share and how I share it. And it has been immensely therapeutic for me. When I lost my dad, I was angry. When I lost my uncle, I was outraged. Anger was the only emotion um that I could feel, and that was the only space that I could really take up. And I didn't want to be angry because I was angry at everything, everyone. And so I ended up starting a podcast
Mhm.
out of a way to relieve, because journaling just wasn't enough. I was going through pages of like I'm still angry. I'm angry at how did I lose everyone, and how am I supposed to navigate this space? And one of the things that I also had was shame tied to my own mental health. And I started to say, you know what? I'm sure I'm not the only person that's experiencing this. I know I'm not the only person that's lost somebody. So, how do I change that? How do I make myself not be so angry at loss? Because loss is an inevitable part of life. If you keep living long enough, you will lose someone, something. And so, I can't harbor this anger because I still have great work to do. And so once I was able to kind of get through that, I started to say, you know what? I'm going to share my story without shame.
Mhm.
And the very first time that I actually shared my story on like an open forum was at the NAMI Central Texas walk. And they asked me, and I still to this day don't know how they found my information, who put my name in the hat, but they came and they asked me if I would come and share my story, um, and like why I do what I do with NAMI. And I was like, sure. And I got up in front of it's probably about 300 something people. Um, to share my story about where I've been, where I'm at, and how it's going. And I feel like pain can be turned into purpose. And
Mm.
that is where I've kind of cycled in my grief cycle. And there's times where I go back into, anger and denial and, depression. But I think sharing your story can be so therapeutic. And the more you share your story, the more comfortable and then the more insight that you get. Because I think sometimes when we think about it from a distance, it's like, oh yeah, I went through this. But then when you start to share it, you're like, man, I went through this.
Mhm.
And I'm here now in a space where I can talk about it. And it never fails. People come up to me afterwards and just are like, they tell me, you don't look like what you've been through, or thank you so much for sharing. I have either myself or someone else have experienced this, and you just getting up there just emboldened me to want to share my story. And so I would tell anyone, continue to tell your story. Tell your story. The more we tell our story, the more conversations we can have that will just debunk that stigma, create that safe space for more people to share their stories, and embolden others to want to get the help and or seek out help for their loved ones.
Yeah. Yeah, it personalizes it. And now there all these people can say, oh my God, I know someone, I met someone. Or I met then 10, 20, probably. I mean, because you're right. I mean, like we're all going through stuff, our own versions of things. If we can talk about them, you know, having that personal connection to things is pretty powerful. Um, and then you said so many, like, I just was like even mentally writing down some of the things that you said. Pain can be turned to purpose. I love that. But so you said a lot of great stuff, but I always like to end by just kind of saying, okay, if there was nothing else you wanted someone to hear from this and really take with them, whether, any potential person who's listening, whether someone who may be struggling, someone who's trying to support someone, or just someone who just meandered over here randomly, and what would you want them to hear?
Two things. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get to where you're going, as long as you keep going. And one of the things that I live by, I wake up to is do not cheat the world out of the gift of you.
Mm. I love that. I love that. Because we are all a gift, and it gets so easy to forget that when we're overcome with something. It feels all consuming. Oh, love it. Jasmine, I'm so grateful. I wanted to make sure, I mean, Jasmine has talked about so many incredible resources that exist. So don't forget those, the 988 crisis line. If you're connected to the veterans community, I think you press one, and then you're talking to people who are plugged into the specific community. NAMI, as she mentioned, they have chapters everywhere for the most part. So a lot of great resources there. Um, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has incredible resources. Again, like Jasmine was saying, local chapters as well as national efforts. And then of course there's us at the Veteran Spouse Network. If you're not aware already, we offer free mental health suicide prevention training all the time. And it is for the civilian, right? This is not for providers. You don't have to have any understanding of anything. That's the whole point, is that you can come in, learn what those warning signs are, and learn real tools to help yourself or someone you love. So take advantage of the resources that are out there, because they're there, they're for you. And so many of them are free. So many of them are free. So, Jasmine, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you hopping on, and for you continuing to share your story and empowering others.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And for all our listeners, we will see you, or you will hear us rather, next month. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.